come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are all children of light, the children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet of hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we awake or asleep, that we might live with him. Therefore encourage one another and build one another up, just as you are doing. This begins to build on some of the points that was made at the end of the previous section about the second coming and about just exactly what's going to happen here. But it's interesting that Paul, as he's writing to them, and perhaps it's even in this section, he's responding to questions that they have sent to him via Timothy. Remember, Paul was anxious about the state of things of Thessalonians. He was anxious for Timothy and his companions to come and bring him word. And in fact, that they did that. And he referred to that event earlier as how comforted he was, how delighted he was in hearing good news about their improving spirituality, and how encouraging that they were being, and how much their love and faith has grown. But Paul then, perhaps even they spurred the questions in the previous section about the second coming, and even in this section by questions that came to Timothy. But Paul leads by saying, well, you don't need to have anyone write to you, but yet Paul's writing to them. So apparently there's some need there. But he starts off, why does he say that they don't have a need for anyone to write to them or explain to them further about Jesus' second coming? Pardon? Okay, they like a thief in the night. That those are kind of the bounds. And as Jesus said, even during his ministry, you don't know. No one knows but God. And so there's no matter how you knit the clues together, no matter how carefully you part the words, it's still going to be not undetectable, an unforecastable, well, not even unforecastable. It's been clearly forecast. It's going to happen. It's just we aren't given the particulars of when it's going to happen. And if I've told you that nobody knows, then further explanation is superfluous. But that doesn't really satisfy, does it? We have questions. We have things that we want to know, like, what about the people that died? Did they miss out? What's going to happen for them? What provisions are going to be made for them? It's not to say, Paul didn't say, I've told you everything that you could possibly want to know. But rather, he simply starts off by saying, you don't need any further explanation, because I've told you what you need to know. And even when Jesus was ascending, we had the picture from Acts 1 in verse 7. Even when he's ascending, his disciples are asking, well, is this it? Are you going to set the kingdom up now, the last thing to check off the list before you leave? And Jesus' reply is, it's not for you to know the seasons of that. The Father knows. The Father's plan, the Father will do this according to his desire. And that's all that we as the servants really need to know about it. We want to know more. We were not satisfied with that, but in fact, that's what we need to know about it, and that's here what Paul leads with. That said, that there's and I'll just the question. The first question asked: What do you think? The second question, rather. What do you think that people are so captivated by this? Why does this draw our curiosity so much? What's going to happen, or when if someone comes up with a new algorithm or a new methodology to predict the end times, when the end of time is going to be? Why does that capture our imagination? Caleb? And maybe that's a forecast for our planning so that we can plan accordingly, I guess, that there's something to that. Again, that idea of having some kind of secret knowledge, when you think about, I heard it expressed this way one time, and this came to mind as Caleb was talking, that, given all the knowledge there is in the universe, that we're hardly smarter than the furniture. We're only a couple of IQ points up on the furniture, given that all there is to know. So if you get a chance to know something a little special, then that gives you a little bit of a margin over your fellow humans, the competition, and maybe that's a source of feeling good about that. I've always been kind of fascinated by that, because it seems like about, at least from my observation, about every other generation, somebody comes up with a prediction of the end of the world. Someone has said, I've run it through the algorithm, I've run it through the computers, I've double, triple checked the number, and we know it's going to be May 11th, 2011. And then this forecast comes and goes, and it doesn't happen. And the guy making the prediction come back and say, "Okay, I missed a decimal point in the place. We've got the real time, and it's going to be in October." And then October comes and goes, and nothing changes. When I was in high school, there was a book that was published that gave I graduated in the class of '75, and several of the people in my circle that read this book, so my companions, were really doubting, is it even worth going to college? The name of the book was The Late Great Planet Earth, and some of you are of have matured to a sufficient vintage, may recall the title of that book. But if it's not that one, 20 years later or so, there'd be another one. Someone else has come out with this book or this system that explains exactly when it's going to be, so that we can be prepared. You can get your house in order and get all your debts paid, or get everything reckoned that you're going to, and clear the decks, because you'll be ready for whatever God's got planned next for us, because this is the day. And people, they're just drawn to that. There are some people, anyway, that are drawn to it. I'm fascinated by how they came up with the calculation, but I keep coming back to what Jesus actually said, what Paul and the apostles actually said about it. No matter how sharp you are, no matter how fast your computer is, how many decimal places you can calculate to, you can't predict it. It's unknowable by humankind. And we can't, we might negotiate, we might wish it would be different, we might have questions. Things that even if I can't know the date, I want to know what about the dead, or what kind of bodies are we going to have, or something that we will come up and be curious about, and maybe even get a fixation on. But in fact, we're going to have to get satisfied with being dissatisfied. Several comments. Chris, and then Joanne, and Althea.
Just kind of interesting mind. Something that happened is fascinating. I don't think I'm telling galaxy. To me, it's kind of fascinating, but like you don't know ocean. You don't know now, and you never know.
And again, our curiosity is not, God's not bound or obligated by our curiosity, no matter what it is. And we are constantly gathering information and recataloging the information that we had based on the new information that shows up as we get better photographs and better knowledge base and such. So all those things that are scientific facts that you go back to your 1968 high school science books, and then look at the 1988 science, into revisions in the 1988 science high school, the high school science books, and you just see the fact that they're constantly having to refine this information based on more new knowledge. And so pinning it down in this fashion, somebody in the 1800s, or somebody in the early 1900s, or even in the early 2000s, somehow is going to, we've got it for sure this time. You just have to be skeptical about it. What's changed? Yeah, more scientific knowledge, but in fact, the methodology hasn't changed so much that really it's any more reliable. Joanne and Althea. It's for some people. It is they're such experts at procrastination that they want to arrange the schedule in such a way that they can wait to the last possible minute to finish the task, so it's completed by the deadline. Althea. Well, and the explanations are usually kind of compelling based on the way that they've got to explain things. I mean, they don't just, not just rounding up people outside of the grade schools or people that aren't educated or that are somehow more of a victims of this kind of schema. Not to denigrate anyone, but this seems like some people are just drawn to this, and time after time it proves to be an unfruitful calculation, and we end up going back and looking real hard at the passages in the New Testament to talk about this and come back to the conclusion that Jesus wanted us to draw it. We don't know. No one knows but the Father. And that was quite literally Jesus' parting words before he ascended, is that it's not for you, not for mankind to know. I've given you your marching order, he told it to his disciples. I've told you what it is that I want you to do, and this isn't on the list. Telling people how long they have is not on the list. And what we do in the meantime gets to be really important, are the decisions that you make based on the truth that we have been given. As Paul draws in this particular conclusion. That's the conclusion that he's inviting the Thessalonians to think about, is how prepared are you? Are you in fact children? Given that you've been forewarned and you've been armed with this information, then what kind of decisions do you need to be making day to day? What kind of decisions, where do you need to put your focus? You need to put your focus on being prepared. And in fact, that's his advice to the Thessalonians. And so he kind of gently chides them here. Says, I told you, when I was with you before, I explained this to you, and the explanation hasn't changed. God's word.
And doesn't that bring
That's an excellent, and that was one of the points that I wanted to, after we kicked the ball around here, kicked the can back and forth a little bit, we get to come back to basically going right back to the advice that Jesus left, that Paul left for the Thessalonians, and that's the answer we get. The answer hasn't changed in the centuries in between. This is our comfort, this is our answer. That it is coming, and we can know that by our faith. It's not something we can demonstrate in a lab. The evidence given in the written record is strong enough to be convincing, and that answer is the one that we take away. That we can't know. We don't know. And someone that says that they do know, we should be skeptical of, because they're basically saying that they've done something that Jesus said couldn't be done. We can't know. And as a result, that's the answer that we keep coming back to. But we know and have that assuredness as part of our faith and the promises of God that if he said that he's coming back and going to meet us in the air, that's what we should expect. And if that's the expectation and we can't know exactly when it's going to be, all we can do is be as prepared as we can. That's really the conclusion. I guess we finished early. There's more that he says, but basically that's the circle that he comes back around to. Tim.
Look at those that get caught up in whether making these predictions, figuring out whatever the latest formula is, those that pay attention boils down to insecurity and not understanding. That's all. Not when. If. Faith lets us answer that question.
And it is our faith. But we weight that with, for me, the overriding characteristic of God is the keeper of his promises. The fact that he did what he said to do, that he did at all those many stages in his history of dealing with his people. and in fact that Jesus came as promised the first time. I mean, at the point, at what point does the Scriptures become an unreliable witness? And I haven't reached that point yet. Now, not everyone recognizes, not everyone is willing to concede that point. People still struggle with that right now. They don't believe the Scriptures. Even in this day and time, there are people that you know and people in our communities, people that we interact with that don't believe the Scriptures in the way that we do. And it's not, I don't think it's a birth thing. It wasn't the house that I was born in or the tent that I was born in. It's the exposure and the time that we spent studying them together to come to that realization. And one of the characteristics we have to take away from it is God keeps his promises. If in fact it's promised that Jesus will come again, then that bears the same weight as Jesus coming the first time. If in fact your belief in the resurrection is the fact that God raised Jesus from the dead, and we've got all the evidence from that, and that's the conclusion we've got, and that's the thing that we should believe until we find out differently, till we find out that this witness is unreliable. As unsatisfied, and what that's going to mean in the meantime is that we're liable to have questions that we can't answer. That used to be a lot bigger deal than it was, you know. Growing up, you know, if you wondered about something, you couldn't find it. If your dad didn't know, and you couldn't look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica that you had in the house, you would have to go to bed wondering about it. Whereas in our current generation, if you're wondering, you know, how much does a quart weigh, you can ask Google. You don't have to go to bed with your mind wondering about the answers to at least some of those questions. But we, as God's people, are going to have to get used to the fact that He hasn't answered all of our questions to our satisfaction. And that's been that way all the time. There's all kinds of things that we have questions about. This is just one special category. And this is something that captivated the Thessalonians. They wanted to know more, but Paul here begins this section. I was fascinated by this, by saying, we don't need to tell you anything about it. You already know everything that you need to know. He tells them some more, but in fact, you really, when you ask this question, you in fact already were in possession of the answer. And he does remind them of what they need to be doing in the meantime, which is the bulk of the second half of this paragraph, is that you need to behave like you know this. You know, given that you know that the bridge is out, should you keep driving at the speed that you're driving at toward the gap that now exists over the ravine or the river. If you knew that was the circumstances, you would adjust the decisions that you're making now, and that's what he's inviting them to do. Not about the bridge being out. That's kind of a trivial example. Given that I've told you, I've explained to you what the explanation is. I've given you the explanation. What kind of decisions do we make in the meantime? About our preparedness, about what our minds are on, about the things that we're focused on. Given that it can come, like the thief in the night, and the thief in the night is this great example, because if you knew which night the thief was coming, what would you do? You would certainly make sure your stuff was locked. You might stay up all night and guard it. You might have extra people on hand to be able to cope with the thief. If the thieves are not in the business of advertising when it is that they come, but we know that there's, people steal stuff, and in the dark of night, they're emboldened to steal them all kinds of time. But if you knew when the theft was going to happen, you would take measures to protect yourself. And that's exactly the kind of knowledge that we're armed with and what Paul's inviting them to do. Joe.
I was religious, and I would think about the passage. I do remember the times riding in my car, and I'd be thinking about, the Lord can do that right now. But then I would say to myself, no, he wouldn't, because I'm not going to know what he's. I'm knowing. I would play this mind game, and it's me when you ask your question. Why people want to know, or I think people have a problem with control. They like to be controlled. They like power. They like getting a lot of people. Their lives are hard. They grasp whether it's medication, therapy, all these worldly things. Really, there is only one answer. That is God. And verse 4 really struck me. It says, "But you brothers that this day should rise. So prepared, are prepared. Not to God. We may be surprised how, but we're prepared in our attitude. Very hard. That's why it's very hard to render their lives to God, trust Him because of that desire, soul, and like children. Verse 5 says, children like trusting Father.
And it is. We do struggle with that, and it's oftentimes, if we're really honest with ourselves and evaluate the situation in depth, it's really the illusion of control. We're not really in control. We just kind of feel like we are because things turned out the way we were planning. And in fact, it wasn't a matter of control. We may be able to exercise controls over what we do and think, and it may support that illusion. But in fact, we don't have control. And we have to live with that expectation that there's not only time and chance, but there's also God's will that can supersede and trump ours. And maybe things don't turn out the way that we prepared for, or what we're expecting, how we're expecting them to. But that's within bounds. That's also an acceptable solution. It's just we need to accept these truths and understand them as God's children. And as God's children, you shouldn't be, if you're surprised that Jesus is coming back, if nobody explained that as being part of it, then yeah, that gap needs to be filled. You need to understand what your reasonable expectations ought to be as God's children. And that promise of Jesus coming back and the weight that means to you as His servant, given that He's promised that this is the case, that Jesus is coming back, and we will meet Him in the air, as Paul's described in the previous chapter, and even alludes to in this one, that you should have that expectation as a child of God. And it may mean that you've got further questions, and we can kind of look to see what the Scriptures have to say about that. But a great many of them are going to end up at the same place. Just be prepared. Know that this is the expectation, that as being the servant, when you are the servant in the master's house, he doesn't give you a detailed itinerary for what the rest of your life is going to be doing. He doesn't give you this is going to be your assigned task next Thursday, and in the Friday after that, this is going to be your task, and then you're going to be doing something completely different in September. We aren't given that information. Our job as servants is to show up for duty. And how much duty is that? Is tomorrow going to be a 12-hour day? A 16-hour, 20-hour day? We don't know. We serve up ready to serve, prepared, and with our armor on. That's what this passage describes. That's the expectation. That's the success plan that we have in dealing with all of these unknowns. It's not to satisfy all the knowns and the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. We aren't charged with doing that. We're charged for being prepared and being on duty, properly equipped. And that's what we need to focus our mission on, and not what kind of body are we going to have, or which order we're going to meet Jesus in the sky, or how long the resurrection's going to take, and is Jesus actually going to set foot on earth again, and all these things that we maybe can't fully decide. We need to not be distracted by those, because we can be distracted by them, and they will prevent us from doing our duty, which is being prepared and equipping ourselves with as we've been afforded. And that's what Paul here reminds him of. He doesn't do it in a threatening, argumentative, berating sort of fashion. He does it, I think, in a very, very encouraging. I mean, I can read this and not feel like I'm being corrected, when in fact I'm having to realize I needed to get my mind right. My mind had strayed off where it ought to be, and I was being fixated on what I'm going to do next week or what I've got to do before the end of the month. It's easy for us to become distracted by that, because we are, after all, temporal, linear people. We live time in this fashion. That's how we manage our life. That's this characteristic of life under the sun. God's not bound by that. He supersedes that. He extends beyond that. He's not bound by the things that we're concerned about. He doesn't live his existence that way. God is present in every moment of time equally. And we can barely even say that and have a hint at what it really means. Whereas we're, What you had for lunch yesterday, that experience is completely past, and you've stopped thinking about it, maybe. Unless it's a really good lunch, right? Or you had really good company. I was in Texas this past week, and I'm still thinking about the barbecue that I had there. So I'm still, we kind of cope with that with our extrusion of our linear life, but that's completely different from God. And God's got the life that He's prepared for us, and that transition that we'll make to that life that He's prepared for us, we'll have all kinds of questions and concerns about that don't change anything about what we're supposed to be doing right this minute. That armed with this additional knowledge, what are we going to do differently? Except it is, if we did know that it's going to be September 21st, it's right there on this ancient calendar that somebody unearthed, and it's September 21st, and it tells us that probably, we could go ahead and order that new car and not ever have to worry about making more than a couple of payments on it, right? We'd be ahead. That's the way that human beings would arm themselves and try to reconcile this kind of inside information, and God chooses not even to distract us with it. The plan is, I've got a plan. I will exercise the plan, and I know when these things are going to happen, so that you don't have to. You don't have to worry about it. What you can be focused on is being children of light. That God enables us to do that. That's the reason, partly, why we've been called out of the darkness. We are not of the night or of the darkness in verse 5. So let us not sleep as others do, but let's keep awake and be sober. The lesson invited us to consider in chapter 5 and verse 3, the first part of the verse, and compare that again with 2 Peter 3 and verse 3 following. It's what's the world's attitude about the second coming in general? How much time do the majority of people on the planet think about the second coming? Chris is giving us the big zero. They say basically, even in the time of the first century, that people said, the flood was a long time ago. It's almost like it didn't happen. And it's Peter's description of them here, they were willfully ignorant of the fact that the world existed for centuries before and centuries after the flood. And the flood was a do-over. The flood was a complete wipe of everything that breathed air. And they're willfully ignorant of that. They say, that can't happen. That's a fairy tale. And in fact, in verse 3, that they're saying there's peace and security. Well, nothing like that has happened for centuries. What makes you think it's going to happen again? That's a 1 in 10,000. That's like a meteor strike on the earth. Happens once every 10,000 years, whether we want it or not. And we've been keeping track since the last one. We got several thousand years that we can burn off. Well, we not even have to worry about this. That's the wrong thinking. That's not the point that you should be getting from this. And the fact what the world thinks about it, and that they go about living their lives in an unprepared, unequipped fashion, is not the template that we should be paying attention to. If you're gauging your behavior and how you think and what you do and what you plan based on what your neighbors are doing, it's probably wrong. Unless your neighbors are also following after the gospel with the same interests that you are, and things being what they are, Jesus said they're probably not. When he says that there are few and many that find the gate to salvation and the way of destruction, respectively, that if you're paying attention to the many, you're paying attention to the wrong thing. You're not prepared. You're not going to end up prepared except by accident, and you're certainly unlikely to be well equipped to be able to fulfill your duty of being awake and sober on the lookout. And what are you on the lookout for? Well, our enemies, our adversaries, wiles to draw us away from temptation. The ways that we may escape temptation. You ought to be on the lookout for, how can I serve God? Given if your schedule suddenly cleared and you had 15 or 20 minutes on your hand, isn't it an opportunity to read a chapter in your favorite book? Maybe the first thing you ought to think about as a child of God is, what can I do? Given that my schedule just cleared, is there something I can do for God? Look around you and see if there's some service that you can render to, especially a fellow Christian, but someone else that would just appreciate a break. And oftentimes we just walk right past those opportunities. It's not because we're unwilling to perform them. We're just not looking for them. We aren't sober enough. In fact, it didn't equip ourselves. We equipped ourselves for what we thought the problems of the day were. And so all of our posture is defensive. We're not thinking about going out and being graceful to others when we get the opportunity. Those are the opportunities that we miss. That despite the fact that our armor is in place and buckled on right, and our helmet's nice and shiny, and it's not, the expiry date hasn't come and gone. We know that it's fit for use, but we aren't putting it to use as we are given the opportunities, because we're just simply not looking for them. That takes being sober, being diligent, being awake. And in fact, a lot of God's people will kind of sleepwalk through life and miss those opportunities to serve others and to give God the glory for that, just simply because they weren't paying close enough attention. Because we're so distracted by the things, by keeping our schedules, keeping our plans. I like the quote. It's not a scriptural quote, but life is what happens while you're making other plans. And we tend to be perpetually distracted by that. And what Paul is saying here, that's not the formula. Those weren't your marching orders. That's not the instructions that you were given. It's not for you to know the seasons, but to follow the instructions that you've been given. Preaching, in the Acts 1 example, what did Jesus tell them to do? You will bear witnesses to me in Judea, in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and othermost parts of the world. When you're all finished with that, then come back and I'll give you some more instructions. He didn't say that. I'm kind of extrapolating. But basically, you've been given your task, and worrying about when I'm going to see you again face to face is not on the list. And that reminder here of Jesus encouragement even to his closest disciples, the people he spent the most time teaching, and he spent the most time with during his ministry on earth, is he still having to remind them and help them to adjust their expectations, adjust their attention span into the things that they've been given and not the things that they're curious about. Now, being curious, an inquisitive mind isn't a bad thing, providing it doesn't drive us into atrophy and distract us from our duties. And in fact, it may actually build, having a desire to do things better is not necessarily, or make improvements, particularly challenges to ourselves to be more aware, more attentive, more awake, better prepared. Those are good motivations. Those are good things for us to think about. But we can't even let those distract us from the duty at hand, which is following our marching orders. Again, that we wouldn't look to the world, wouldn't necessarily go to the how to improve self-improvement section in the bookstore as the way to do that, but to use the instructions and dwell on and meditate upon the Word of God in a way that we can generally say that it's a lamp to our feet, that it guides us. My mind meditates on it day and night, which is the example that we're given in the Psalms. That's the way that we've been coached. We're being coached to think and to deal with information and queries that we have about this, and that spirit is intended. This idea in question number 6, we touched on this about being sons of light and sons of the day. Is that, aside from the preparedness aspect of that, how else is that contrasted here in this passage? Well, there's a section in the book that contrasted the sons of light and the sons of darkness in verse 6. How are those behaviors contrasted? Well, bad things happen in the dark. Okay, that's an opportunity for us to scratch itches, maybe undetected. And so the cover of darkness may, in fact, obscure our behaviors from other people who might normally criticize them. But what kind of behavior, what I'm kind of going at here is, where is the focus for the sons of the light? Are they focused on what it is that they want? Or what it is that they want to do? I mean, the occasion of the darkness is not so you can get more work for God done. The occasion of the darkness is so I can do what I want to do. And the sons of darkness tend to be focused on what they want, whereas the sons of light are focused on something else. They've got other things that motivate them. They may do some of the same things. The sons of darkness may, in fact, obey the law, and they may not be overtly wicked because they don't want to be punished. Whereas the sons of light, they obey the law and avoid being wicked because they know it pleases their Father. And one big difference, and this is the table in the middle of page 38 as a comparison. The sons of the day don't sleep and are alert. With the sons of the night, they do sleep. The sons of the day are sober, whereas in verse 7, the sons of the night are drunken. Stark contrast there. The sons of the day know about salvation and are concerned with living with Him, living with Jesus, whereas the sons of darkness are reserved for wrath. And the big place in the middle, in which they don't have a point of comparison, the sons of the light equip themselves with the breastplate of love and faith and a helmet of salvation. And the sons of the darkness, well, it doesn't tell us what they do, but we've got the picture, right? They're going to equip themselves with what they think they look good in, or what they think they like. Whereas we're equipping, the sons of the light are equipping themselves with the tools that they need to be able to accomplish their master's will. And that stark contrast between them about how they live their lives and how and even the source of their decision making is made in verses 6 through 10. David?
If you're sober and thinking about all the things, how his second is that for what you
Yeah.
you just talk.
And we recognize, at least that reminds me immediately, this breastplate of faith and love and the helmet of righteousness reminds me immediately of Ephesians 6, which describes the full armor of God. And Paul there, writing to the Ephesians, later on in history, as it turns out, encouraged themselves not just to have the breastplate and the helmet, but go ahead and buckle on the full armor of God. That's not all that you've been issued. That's, you're not just showing up with your the proper headgear and footgear. We've been given a full array of armor in which to equip ourselves to accomplish God's will and accomplish God's instructions to us. And Paul there encourages the Ephesians to buckle it all on. And I think that he's just using a shorthand version of that. It's the same advice that he's given to the Thessalonians. Is in the meantime, to reflect your preparedness, your soberness, the fact that you are awake and that you are busy doing the Father's will, then go ahead and avail yourselves of all the equipment that you've been issued, so that you'll be fully prepared, fully able to defend yourself, fully able to convince other people of why it is that you believe the way that you do, by using the sword of the Word of God. That picture here jumps to mind here. Don't leave your armor back in the barracks. As you're stepping out into battle for the day or stepping out to do your duty, wear the full complement of that armor so that you'll be fully prepared. Paul here, again, he reminds them at the end of this section, for God has not destined us for wrath, that's by comparison to those sons of darkness, but to obtain salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ. This is the reason why we became Christians, most probably. It wasn't because we had this full understanding of what kind of person God was and in keeping His promises and such, but we most likely got most interested in becoming a Christian to escape the punishment that would be ours without Christ. We wanted relief from being punished for our sins. We realized that we owed huge debts and didn't have any means at all to be able to pay those debts off. How were we going to meet them? What kind of payment plan? What could we offer in exchange for having our soul destroyed in eternity for our sins? We had nothing. And in fact, this is what probably motivated people to become Christians in the first place, is that promise of salvation. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the beginning of what that relationship entails. That's a major benefit. I don't want to discount that. We shouldn't ever forget that. As a matter of fact, that should be a motivation in us staying with the plan day by day and week on week. That salvation is something that's significant, but that's not all there is to it. And that's not all there is to understand. That in addition, because you are qualified now to receive that salvation, that also entails responsibilities on your part. Those responsibilities of what it really means to be a disciple. It's not just to mentally accede that some of those teachings have merit, but to really embrace them and embrace the lifestyle and embrace the lifestyle teachings that gospel brings along with it. Leslie? Mhm.
And in verse 90,
Your destiny is to live for Christ, and He did that you might live. We're true. That's all we need. That's our destiny.
nothing else really matters.
And it's maybe not satisfying, but that's the answer to your question. The thing that you maybe started out, that you sent maybe this list of questions to Timothy about what's gonna happen in the afterlife, or what's gonna happen at the second coming, and in fact you already had the answers, just that you weren't satisfied with the answer. And Paul undertakes explaining it to try to help them to get rebalanced. Not to be overweight in their curiosity, but give it a full appreciation of their station in life, is that servants don't often get to question the will of their master. Matter of fact, that example in Luke 17 of the guy that comes home at the end of the day, he's not necessarily concerned about whether or not, what kind of day his servants have had and stuff. He wants to put his feet up and have the servants be servants. Said, bring me my slippers, bring me my evening meal, let me seek peace and comfort. And when they do that, does he tip them? Does he thank them? They're just being servants. They're just doing what they're there for. And we need to live life with that understanding. No matter how much we think we are extending ourselves, and how much the room that we've created in our crown for the jewels that are going to go there. No matter how much we may think that to be the case, we've got a lopsided view of this. In fact, we're just doing what we've been told, which is that's the whole duty of the servants. The whole duty of man: fear God and keep His commandments. As the Ecclesiastes writer reminds us as he closes the book. That as we understand that relationship, then we make decisions in light of that understanding. As Leslie said, you already know. And I'm just reminding you here, ultimately, in the instruction that he closes with, this is very similar to the previous paragraph. Previous paragraph says, we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. In this paragraph, in verse 11, therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you were doing. Excel even more, he said earlier in the book. He said, don't stop what you're doing. Don't be satisfied with it. Find new ways to do that, to push the envelope. And those are our marching orders. That's how we need to be aligning our curiosity, is how can we fulfill this commandment more thoroughly. That's our lesson. We'll begin with chapter 9 in the book, the second part of 1 Thessalonians 5 next week.